In 1959, a tiny British racing company from Surbiton arrived in Formula One with a car that looked completely wrong for the era. Its engine was behind the driver, its body was barely larger than the man sitting inside it, and its four-cylinder engine made roughly 240 horsepower against Ferrari's much larger factory machinery. The men who ruled Grand Prix racing had seen this kind of thing before. They dismissed the British specialists as garagisti, garage owners and assemblers, rather than serious automobile manufacturers. Ferrari had the factory, the engineers, the money, and the tradition. Cooper had a small workshop, a handful of mechanics, and a design philosophy that had begun with motorcycle engines and discarded Fiat parts. Then, on December 12, 1959, that little rear-engined Cooper crossed the finish line at Sebring, with its driver pushing it by hand after it ran out of fuel, and the driver was still Formula One world champion. This is the story of the Cooper T51. It started with two old Fiats. The Cooper story did not begin in a factory. It began in Surbiton, Surrey, with Charles Cooper, his son John Cooper, and John's friend Eric Brandon. After the Second World War, they were looking for a practical way into the new 500cc racing formula, a class deliberately designed to make motor racing accessible to ordinary competitors. They did not have the resources of Ferrari or Maserati. They had ingenuity. The first Cooper was built in 1946 using suspension components from two Fiat Topolinos, a simple frame, aluminium bodywork, and a 500cc Jap motorcycle engine. The motorcycle engine sat behind the driver and drove the rear wheels by chain. That layout was not initially some grand aerodynamic revolution. It was simply practical. The engine was already designed to drive a motorcycle's rear wheel. Putting it behind the driver made the mechanical arrangement easier. But sometimes the most important revolutions begin as shortcuts. John Cooper was born in Kingston, Surrey in 1923. His father, Charles, had worked as a mechanic before the war and ran Cooper's garage in Surbiton. By 1948, Cooper had produced 12 Mk2 cars, sold to customers for about £500 each. One of those young customers was an 18-year-old Sterling Moss. That £500 figure matters because it tells you what Cooper originally was. Not a Ferrari, not a national industrial project. A small business building inexpensive racing cars for people who could not afford the traditional machinery. And that philosophy would survive all the way into Formula One. Ferrari had the factory. Cooper had a different idea. By the middle of the 1950s, Grand Prix racing was still dominated by front-engined cars. The engine sat ahead of the driver, the driveshaft ran underneath the cockpit, and the gearbox and differential were at the rear. It was familiar, proven, and accepted. Ferrari embodied that philosophy. Enzo Ferrari had built his reputation around powerful front-engined racing cars, and the great Italian marque possessed something Cooper could never match: enormous factory resources. Cooper had to think differently. The crucial figure was designer Owen Maddock. Maddock helped develop Cooper's increasingly sophisticated rear-engined cars, and by the late 1950s, the company had discovered something the establishment had underestimated. A rear-engined car did not need to be powerful to be fast. The engine behind the driver eliminated the long drive shaft running through the cockpit. The car could be shorter. The driver could sit lower. The weight could be concentrated closer to the middle of the chassis. The front wheels only had to steer. They did not have to carry the engine. That made the front of the car smaller and lighter. While Ferrari was still fighting for horsepower, Cooper was attacking the problem from the opposite direction. Make the car lighter. Make it smaller. Make it easier on its tires. Make it consume less fuel. Then make it turn. The establishment believed horsepower was the answer. What they did not see was that Cooper was changing the question. The little car that was not supposed to work. For 1959, Cooper needed a proper Formula One machine. The result was the T51. The chassis used a steel tubular space frame covered by lightweight aluminium bodywork. The car carried its fuel in tanks beside the driver rather than behind him, helping keep the handling more consistent as fuel burned away. That mattered because a Grand Prix could last for hundreds of kilometers. Cooper's solution was simple: keep the weight around the driver. The standard Formula One T51 used Coventry Climax's 2,495cc FPF4 four-cylinder engine. It produced about 240 horsepower at 6,750 revolutions per minute. For comparison, Ferrari's V6-powered 246 Dino had considerably more power. On paper, the Cooper was outgunned, but the T51 weighed roughly 470 kilograms in some configurations, and its compact dimensions gave it an entirely different character. The engine was sitting immediately behind the driver. The car was short, light, and responsive. There was no massive nose containing a V6, no long propeller shaft, no huge front-engine structure. It looked almost unfinished beside a Ferrari. That was precisely the point. What Ferrari saw was a small car. What John Cooper saw was less wasted car. But there was one serious problem: the gearbox. Rear-engined Formula One cars were still unusual enough that suitable transmissions were difficult to find. Cooper used modified Citroën gearbox components in its works cars, while Rob Walker's T51s used specialist Calotti transmissions. The solution was crude. It was also effective enough to win the World Championship. Jack Brabham was built for this machine. Jack Brabham was not the sort of driver Ferrari's establishment expected to become a world champion. The Australian had arrived in Europe with a reputation built through Australian racing and engineering rather than European aristocracy. He was not merely a driver, he was a mechanic and engineer who understood how a racing car behaved mechanically. That made him an ideal match for Cooper. Brabham could feel changes in the car and communicate what was happening to the mechanics. He also understood the fundamental advantage of the T51. It did not need to dominate every straight. It needed to survive the entire race while forcing heavier cars to work harder. The 1959 season opened at Monaco on May 10th. Sterling Moss put a Rob Walker-entered Cooper T51 on pole position, the first Formula One pole for Cooper. Then the gearbox betrayed him. Moss retired while leading. That could have been the moment the old establishment pointed and laughed again. Instead, Jack Brabham took over. He completed all 100 laps of the Monaco Grand Prix and finished 20.4 seconds ahead of Tony Brooks's Ferrari. Maurice Trintignant finished third in another Cooper. The little British car had won. But this was not a lucky victory against a broken field. The Cooper had placed 3 cars in the top 5, and Brabham had just scored his first Formula One Grand Prix victory. The engine was smaller, the advantage was everywhere else. The Cooper T51's greatest technical trick was not one component, it was the way everything worked together. The Coventry Climax FPF was a 4-cylinder, naturally aspirated engine of 2,495cc. It produced around 240 horsepower at 6,750 revolutions per minute. But it was still less powerful than Ferrari's best machinery. So Cooper attacked the parts of racing that horsepower could not solve. The T51's engine sat behind the driver and ahead of the rear axle, putting the car's major mass close to its center. Think of a person carrying a heavy suitcase. Hold it at arm's length and changing direction becomes difficult. Hold it close to your body and movement becomes easier. The Cooper was doing something similar. Its weight was concentrated around the middle. That helped the car change direction. The car also avoided the long drive shaft required by a conventional front-engined layout. Less machinery meant less weight. Less weight meant smaller brakes could be used. Smaller brakes meant less unsprung mass. And because the car was lighter, it could accelerate effectively despite having less engine power. That was the spiral Cooper exploited. One advantage created another. The T51 also used a transverse leaf spring at the rear. An old-fashioned solution attached to a very modern overall concept. It was crude, but it worked. The car's dry weight is commonly listed around 472 kilograms. Its wheelbase was roughly 2.31 meters. Its top speed was around 140 miles per hour, depending on gearing and circuit. Nothing about those numbers sounds enormous. Together, they created a car that was devastatingly efficient. The factory giants started losing. After Monaco, the Cooper was no longer a curiosity. It was a threat. Brabham finished second at Zandvoort. He finished third at Reims. Then came the British Grand Prix at Aintree on July 18th. Ferrari expected power to matter. Instead, Brabham won. He completed all 75 laps and beat Stirling Moss's BRM by 22.2 seconds, with Bruce McLaren another 0.2 seconds behind in a Cooper. 3 Coopers finished in the top 3. The factory teams had nowhere to hide, and the championship mathematics were beginning to become impossible to ignore. Brabham was building a points advantage. The Cooper Works team was accumulating results. Stirling Moss was winning in another T51 entered by Rob Walker. Different teams, different mechanics, same basic idea. That was the real danger. Cooper had not created a single freak car that happened to win. It had created a concept other teams could use. At the Portuguese Grand Prix in August, Moss won for Rob Walker in a T51, while Maston Gregory finished second in another Cooper. Dan Gurney's Ferrari was third. Ferrari had been reduced to chasing 2 British rear-engined cars. The establishment had not simply been beaten, it was being surrounded. Ferrari was still alive. Cooper had momentum. Ferrari still had power, and Formula One championships are not won by momentum alone. Brabham's title campaign was interrupted by mechanical failures. At the German Grand Prix, at the fearsome Avus circuit, he retired. At Portugal, he also retired. The T51's biggest weakness had not disappeared. The gearbox remained vulnerable. This was not a flawless machine. The Cooper revolution was not built around perfect engineering. It was built around making the car's strengths outweigh its weaknesses. At Monza in September, Moss won again in a Cooper. Brabham finished third. Tony Brooks and Ferrari still had a mathematical chance. The championship had become a 3-way fight involving Brabham, Moss, and Ferrari's Brooks. The final round would be held at Sebring, Florida on December 12th. Sebring was rough, it was fast, and it was long. The race would run for 42 laps over approximately 5.2 miles per lap. Cooper had already secured the Constructors Championship, but Brabham still needed to secure the driver's title. One race, one championship, one last failure waiting. Sebring was not going to be easy. Brabham knew exactly what was at stake. Stirling Moss started from pole position in another Cooper. Moss immediately attacked. He was faster than Brabham and quickly built a gap. After 5 laps, Moss was reported to have around a 10-second advantage. For a moment, the championship looked like it might swing back toward Moss. Then, the Cooper struck again. Transmission failure. Moss was out. Brabham inherited the lead. The championship was now his to lose. Behind him, the race became a test of endurance. Brabham kept circulating, lap after lap. The finish line approached. And then, on the final lap, the problem nobody wanted arrived. Fuel. The Cooper ran dry. Brabham coasted. The engine stopped. The championship leader was stranded. Instead of ending in humiliation, the Australian climbed out and started pushing. He pushed the Cooper toward the finish. A world championship was no longer being decided by horsepower. It was being decided by one exhausted driver moving a dead racing car with his own hands. The championship came down to a man pushing a dead car. Bruce McLaren was only 22 years old. He was a New Zealander, an engineer-minded driver, and one of the youngest men on the Grand Prix grid. He was also driving another Cooper, As Brabham pushed his T51 toward the finish, McLaren continued racing ahead. The championship calculations were becoming painfully simple. Brabham needed to finish. He did not need to win. He needed to get the car across the line. Tony Brooks and Ferrari still had a mathematical chance. Brooks needed the win and fastest lap to keep the title fight alive. Instead, McLaren took the victory. He completed all 42 laps and became, at the time, the youngest winner of a Formula One World Championship race. Brabham crossed the line in fourth. He had pushed the Cooper across the finish. The car that had spent the season humiliating the factory teams had nearly failed in the most literal way possible. But it had finished, and that was enough. Jack Brabham became the 1959 Formula One World Champion. Cooper became World Constructors Champion. The championship had been won by a car with its engine behind the driver. The first time a rear-engined car had carried a driver to the Formula One World Championship. The first time the old front-engine order had been decisively broken at the highest level. And the most extraordinary part was how ordinary the original idea had seemed. A small British garage had started by selling 500,500 cc races. 13 years later, its philosophy had defeated Ferrari on the world stage. The little Cooper that moved the engine forever. The final result of the 1959 season was not simply Jack Brabham's championship. It was the death of an entire Formula One design philosophy. Brabham's Cooper T51 had won at Monaco and Britain. Stirling Moss had taken victories in Portugal and Italy with another T51. Cooper had accumulated enough points to win the Constructors Championship, while Brabham took the driver's title. 5 World Championship race victories were recorded for T51s in 1959. But the statistics only tell part of the story. The real victory happened underneath the bodywork. The engine was behind the driver. That arrangement had once looked strange. Now it looked inevitable. The T51 had demonstrated that a Formula One car did not need the biggest engine if the entire machine was designed around efficiency. Its 2,495cc Coventry Climax 4-cylinder produced about 240 horsepower. Ferrari's larger-engined cars could produce more. But the Cooper did not have to carry as much weight. It did not need a long drive shaft. It could carry its mass closer to the center of the car. It could use its tires efficiently. It could brake later. It could change direction more quickly. And it could consume less fuel. The advantage was not one spectacular invention. It was the accumulation of small advantages. That is what made the T51 so important. The cost was real, too. The Cooper was not reliable by modern standards. Gearboxes failed, cars retired. Moss lost a likely Monaco victory to transmission trouble. Brabham nearly lost the championship at Sebring when his Cooper ran dry. Brabham's final act at Sebring captures the entire Cooper story. The engine stopped. The factory machinery had failed. So the champion pushed. He pushed a tiny British racing car toward the finish line, while thousands watched. That image became the perfect ending to the old era. The establishment had laughed at the little rear-engined cars. They had called the British specialists garagisti. They believed Grand Prix racing belonged to powerful front-engined factory machines. They were wrong. What happened next would change Formula One forever. Cooper's success in 1959 was followed by an even more dominant 1960 season, when Jack Brabham and Cooper won again. Then came Lotus, then Brabham, then McLaren, then Tyrrell, then Williams, then virtually the entire modern Formula One grid. The rear-engined layout became the foundation of the sport. Ferrari itself eventually had to follow the direction Cooper had helped establish. The days when the engine sat ahead of the driver were ending. The Cooper T51 had not simply beaten Ferrari, it had made Ferrari's old layout obsolete. And that is why the £500 story matters. That money bought the early Cooper 500s in 1948, cars created by a family garage for racers who could not afford the machinery of the establishment. Those little cars established a philosophy: keep it simple, keep it light, put the engine where it makes sense, then let the stopwatch decide. 11 years later, the same philosophy had produced a Formula One world champion. John Cooper, Charles Cooper, Owen Maddock and their small team had not built the most powerful car. They built the car that understood where the future was going. The T51 was crude in places. It was fragile. It was underpowered on paper. And beside a Ferrari, it looked almost ridiculous. But Ferrari had the factory. Cooper had the future. They called it a garage-built toy. Then it won the World Championship. No front-engined car would ever win the Formula One World Championship again after the Cooper revolution had taken hold. The modern Formula One car, from Lotus and Brabham to McLaren, Williams, Ferrari and today's grid, carries the central lesson of that little Cooper. The engine belongs behind the driver. That was the revolution. And it started in a small workshop in Surbiton, with a family that once built 500-pound racing cars for ordinary men. The Ferrari establishment laughed at the garagisti right up until the moment Jack Brabham became world champion. Then the laughter stopped. The Cooper T51 did not merely win a championship, it changed where Formula One put its engine, how constructors thought about weight, how private teams could challenge manufacturers, and what a racing car needed to be fast. The giants had spent years building bigger weapons. The little British team simply changed the battlefield. If you enjoyed this story, there are plenty more like it on the channel. Hit subscribe and I will make it worth your time.